Part 4. 4 stories. 4. You mean someone saw Zhao? Yes, around a cemetery in Simon's hometown. The same town she disappeared from, almost like she was calling us out. We will be short of men if someone leaves, but it can't be ignored. So we'll send Simon. I'll go with him. I'll go with Jason. It'll be easy as I have some home field advantage. What the hell does home field advantage mean? Isabel clearly angered by the prospect that she would be left out of this mission, the one to find her old friend. I know how much this means to you, but we need you here. If Zhao and Jonah somehow have ties, which is likely, this is a plan to divide and conquer. Isabel stood froze, a moment of reflection. I understand. Long gave her a nod. Simon left to go through the process of leaving this quarantine, and she gave a despondent wave goodbye. Once alone, she stopped and leaned her back against the wall. Zhao, she thought, almost giving a grin that she might be found, but it was stifled by the anxiety that had been building since the day she disappeared. What happened that made her disappear? Why so close to when that being who took the form of Jonah appeared? And why back now during this lockdown, a quarantine that finally trapped Jonah? Worry held at bay the joy she would have felt for the possible return of her friend. A sound like thunder shook her from these thoughts and sobered her to the situation at present. She had more pressing things to worry about at the moment, namely the source of that sound which she surmised could only have been the sound of a gun, a heavy caliber one at that, being discharged down the block. She jumped into action. Running down the block towards the source of the noise, one hand already reaching out to the journal at her side, her book of shadows, spells and sigils she had collected over the course of her life. When she turned the corner of the block and saw what was there, she realized that whatever had transpired was already over. What she found was only the aftermath. Bodies scattered across the ground, mostly civilians, but at least 2 guards were there as well, blood splattered across their combat vests. A truck was there, of the ones that delivered water and rations to the quarantine, its bed empty. There were not many people in all, so she began checking for pulses. There was no need to check the guards for a pulse. Whatever it attacked probably had targeted them first. Their bodies were destroyed. The civilians' wounds were not as extraneous, though most of them too, upon inspection, were already deceased. Only one of the civilians was still alive. They began to moan as Isabel felt the throat for a pulse. He sat head against a building, blood matted his hair against his head. Isabel called over the radio that she would need an ambulance quickly for the one survivor, and then gave all the details that she could surmise of the situation. It appears that a group equipped with high-caliber weapons attacked the ration truck. Taking all the food, water, and supplies that were in the truck appears to be their motive upon initial inspection. You're right. The weak and feeble voice of the man answered, a space of silence between every couple syllables where he winced in pain. Except, there was only one gun the man on the pale horse used. Isabel told him to be quiet, save his energy. The ambulance was turning the corner. The injured man was gently lifted onto a gurney, and before the door closed he began to yell a final message to Isabel. Wait. They said there was a place to buy supplies in the lowest section of the parking garage. They did not tell where they got supplies. I think they must be stealing from the stores, shops, and now even the people looking over the quarantine. It's just a block away, that parking garage. That's what I heard. The doors of the ambulance were closed. Isabel once again called over the radio just to let them know that she was on her way to follow the lead given to her by the injured man. She pulled out a map of the city to find the parking garage. Of course there were several, but by the way the man had spoke, it seemed as if it must be the closest one. Isabel walked through the empty streets of a once lively town. She felt like she was in a ghost town. This eerie atmosphere was accentuated by the feeling of being watched. Whenever she looked around, there was the pulling close of a curtain by the fearful residents of the town now under quarantine. They did not really trust Isabel or the organization she was a part of. She didn't blame them. However, she also knew that behind those curtains, or hidden in the alleyways away from the sight of the guards overlooking the lockdown, was that being which had taken the guise of Jonah, and with him unknowable horrors were sure to follow. The fact that the lockdown had been so quiet thus far, apart from the attacks on the ration trucks, was all the more reason to worry about what Jonah was planning. Isabel could only follow the leads that were given, and the only lead she had thus far was the location of the mob that had attacked the trucks, selling the products, attempting to make a profit off the quarantine. Keeping a general sense of peace within the quarantine would be as hard a task as capturing that monster disguised as Jonah. She slowed the pace of her steps as she approached the parking garage. There were a couple of people entering the parking garage themselves as she arrived. A young couple. A starving young couple by the looks of it. "Hey, you two, is this the location of the supplies store?" The two looked a little taken aback by the question. They looked at each other before the man turned to answer her. Yeah, they have food and clean water if you can pay. We have a child, so we scrape together whatever we can to get food. All the stores have been ransacked, and after the supply truck was attacked, we have no way of getting food. Those vultures! After taking all the supplies for themselves, after turning anyone away who couldn't pay their steep prices for food, they then try to pretend like what they are doing is a good thing for everyone. We're not stupid. It's clear that they are trying to make money off this quarantine. No one actually believes them when they say that once they have gathered the supplies needed that they will revolt, rise up against the guards and end this quarantine. But the amount of support they have doesn't matter. No one can stand against them, not when they have that monster anyhow. What monster? Isabel pondered whether or not they actually meant to attack the guards to end the quarantine. The guards certainly could outfight any mob, but if Jonah supplied them with monsters to fight alongside them, the man on that pale horse, the one that carries that huge gun and wears that stupid mask. Well, for now you two should go home. Isabel pulled a badge out of her pocket. Of course it did not say mage or anything on it, just stated that she was a member of the Special Tactical Unit. Other than that, the badge was just like the guards. I'll sort this mess out, and the supply trucks will be back in business, and soon enough the quarantine will end altogether. They just nodded and walked away, clearly a lot less eager to talk now that they knew Isabel was part of the group conducting the quarantine. She walked into the parking garage, down the slope that led into the lowest level. Before continuing on to what would be the lowest level of the parking garage, she drew a large summoning circle. Her smile widened as she drew. "This'll make 'em shit themselves." She laughed as a horde of gas came leaping out of the summoning circle. Their hooved legs, like that of a kangaroo, caused their gait to be more akin to jumping than walking. Their faces lacked a forehead or nose, but still had enough resemblance to that of a man to increasingly cause dread and disturbance even after the initial shock of seeing them dissipated. Their skin also was human-like, though pale and bumpy in its features, causing the idea of them having some grave illness to enter into the mind of those who saw them. Their natural habitat was of the pitch darkness of the back alleys or caves of the Akashic, and their prey would probably never notice them before they were surrounded by a pack of them. Outnumbering is the basic plan Isabel was planning to implement here. She then took out a small stone, a rune, which had a strange lightning strike designed upon it. She slipped this inside of her glove, cradling it in the palm of her hand. Just in case, she thought. It's time to begin. I'll do this the easy way, she thought. Just let the gas do all the work. Then I will walk in afterwards and clean up. With herself in control of them, Isabel knew they would not kill the target, merely frighten them, cause them to reveal whatever weapons they may have, and then outnumber them until they are subdued. She sent the gas forward down the slope and onto the lowest level of the parking garage. This was quickly followed by screams of terror. That was promptly followed by Isabel laughing. This was hastily followed by gunfire. The firing stopped. There were still yells, but those too quieted into just angry language being thrown between the people that were being detained. One of the gas hopped back up to Isabel, looked at her, and made a sound that was something like a gurgle or squawk. They'd done their job. Isabel walked down to see the fugitives. In the parking garage before her, there were only a handful of men being held by the ghasts. Many ghasts had fallen to gunfire, but in time their essence would melt into shadow and sink back into the Akashic. The concrete floor was cluttered with stacks upon stacks of supplies, food, tanks of clean drinking water. She cuffed the men before calling for backup to take them away. The man in the middle spoke. He was on his feet, hands cuffed behind his back, gas holding onto the chain of the cuffs. "This ain't over. Sabnock, come out and end this!" He called, echoed over the concrete enclosure. That sound was soon replaced by another echo, horse hooves plodding slowly down the concrete decline. Here we go, Isabel thought. Time to finally take on the monster. She tapped on a concrete pillar. The gas looked at her as she raised one finger up and then pointed in the direction of the incline. One of the ghasts took the order, hopping up the incline towards the creature. The loud sound of the gun firing echoed off the concrete. All present winced under the oppressive noise that still rung in their ears. The gas flew backwards onto its back, head gone, blue-black blood splattering the concrete along with viscera and strangely luminescent fragments of bone. The pale horse came into view, and then its rider. The rider had the form of a man with the head and mane of a lion. He was wearing a camouflage vest and carrying that large caliber rifle. It spotted Isabel and began raising that rifle and taking aim. Isabel quickly ducked behind the concrete pillar. Once again a blast ringed in her ears, echoing off the wall, assaulting the eardrum. Concrete dust sprayed off the point of impact, showering Isabel's long black hair, her leather jacket with a mist of gray debris. She was wringing her hands as she sat there sitting behind the relative concealment of the pillar, feeling the power of the room she had cradled in her palm. The glove she wore giving a sensation of static shock, but far more powerful. She heard the strange bubbling cry of the gas as they hopped tearing into the horse that let out a ghostly cry. There was more gunfire. At this point, Isabel's hearing was numbed by the previous shots. The important aspect was that the gunfire was directed at the ghasts, and not her. She spun out from behind the pillar. The creature was preoccupied by the ghasts. Good boy, she thought, the way one may applaud a pet that just performed a trick. She thrust the palm of her hand forward, the one with the rune, and a streak of lightning exploded from her hands. She slid backwards, feeling the friction between her boots and the concrete floor, her hair blown back and her features illuminated by the glow of the electricity being discharged. The demon was thrown off its horse. The monster, along with its horse, were immediately descended upon by the handful of remaining ghasts, the rest of the large horde littering the ground around them. The dead gas and the demon began evaporating into shadow, melting into the creative nothing of the Akashic, where they reside as creations of the mind of man. As of now freed from man's whim until their circle is drawn once more. It's over, she thought. However, when she approached the group of handcuffed men that were sitting next to the wall, one broke forward into a sprint. He tossed himself forward to grab a gun laying on the ground. He stood, one arm hanging uselessly. He had dislocated many of its joints in order to get out of one side of the handcuffs. Don't do this, it's not going to end well. Maybe for you. His voice was cracking. He was panicked. Isabel almost found it sad the way he struggled with the safety of the gun, trying to cock it with one hand. She still felt that static electricity in her glove. The man, finally situating the gun in a way that he could fire it, began to pull it up to take a shot. Isabel fired a streak of lightning at his hand as he did so. Upon contact with the lightning, all of the gunpowder within the bullets of the pistol he was holding ignited. The gun exploded in his hand. Blood, shattered bone, and rended flesh rained upon the floor, disattached fingers bouncing off concrete. He fell backwards, writhing on the floor, cradling the spot where his hand was. Isabel could already hear her backup arriving above. He would be saved from blood loss if shock didn't take him. She dragged him out of the garage. Once outside, the men were arrested, and whatever supplies were not destroyed by the conflict was brought back out of the garage. Hey, Isabel. Did you gain any ideas about where Jonah was or his plan was while you were down there? Not much. You should ask the people arrested. I'm sure they had some contact. They summoned a demon. Isabel was looking through the first aid kits collected by the guards of the quarantine. She found what she was looking for. She removed her glove. The rune that was in her palm was now dull and cracked. She dropped it. It was so brittle at this point it fell apart into powder upon impact with the ground. Her hand itself was bright red and burning. She was applying the burn cream she had found in the first aid kit to it when she remembered what that couple had said. There was a couple I met. They said that the ones gathering the supplies were planning to end the quarantine. Break out, she said while wrapping her hand. That is probably how Jonah is motivating the people that is working for him, promising that the power of the creatures he summons for them will be used to gain their freedom. The real ultimate motivation for Jonah, however, I do not know. Well then, I guess it's time to grill these guys. They were only lead as of now. He turned to walk away before giving a final damn it to himself. He was hoping this would be the key to finding Jonah, but now he was not so sure. Time to hit the streets again, try to find out anything new. Isabel's thoughts momentarily drifted to Simon and Jason, wondering what they were finding, but she shook those thoughts from her head and, putting the glove back on her hand, continued down the street. 3. The being that had taken the form of Jonah had a wide smile on its face. Its summoning of Sabnock had created a lot of tension within the quarantine. Stuck in this lockdown with me, it reasoned, is enough sacrifices to summon an army of demons. Soon it would be able to accomplish all sorts of things with the power it's gaining. If it attacked the guards over the exit of the quarantine directly, that could create all sorts of tension, and a great amount of blood could be spilled. The power and all that life essence, it reasoned, I could really do this. I could really defeat him in this spat. This time, I will win. There was finally a knock on the door. The knock it had been waiting for. He opened the door to 3 men, all young, under 30 at least. Healthy blood that would flow well, it thought. Welcome inside. They looked surprised at how young the man appeared. The being that had taken the form of Jonah had not aged Jonah's body in the least since it had started inhabiting it. This young man that looked like he could still be in high school was the one who had the skill and ability to summon the monsters they wished to use to break out of the quarantine? He must be. There he stood. They introduced themselves and became acquainted. The name's Julian. He was wearing a hoodie even in this sweltering heat outside. Jonah. Hey, it's Jake. He was wearing a blue baseball cap and seemed to be overcome with nervous shakes of some kind, clearly overexcited about the meeting they were having. Jonah. And I'm Charles. He was larger and more confident than the other two, greeting him with a slap on the shoulder and a wide grin. He would probably need to be dealt with first, not that any of them were going to be of any actual threat to the being inviting them into the house. Jonah. He closed the door behind the final guest. They got Terry. They beat that monster you gave him, and now they got him. Not to worry. When we end the quarantine, we'll take him with us when we go. If they can get rid of that monster on the horse, how are we supposed to beat him? The reason he was so nervous and shaky was apparently because he doubted their group had any chance of standing against the quarantine guards. The eyes of the three men all fell on Jonah, waiting for an answer. The more I prepare, the more I get practice summoning these monsters. And the more blood I spill, it thought to itself, but they had no need for that part. The stronger or stranger the monsters I summon will become. They hold within them different ways to affect the people around them, the monsters that is, both in the way their emotions can be heightened or the way people perceive those around them. They are equipped with much more than brute strength. Follow me to the basement. You can help me summon the next creature there. Glajalabalus is a good pick, I believe. They nodded and followed it towards the stairs to the basement, where it knew a monster it had already summoned was waiting to assist in the acquisition of that vital life source that serves as fuel to summon those grotesque beasts, waking them out of the darkness of the Akashic. What the hell is that? You must be talking about the summoning circle. In the middle of the basement floor a large circle stood, a star in its center, and between the points of the star were strange figures, images, and words written in long-dead languages. They all stood around that circle, examining its strange markings. So how are we supposed to help you again? Julian looked towards Jonah with a cocked eyebrow. Jake was now visibly shaking in fear upon seeing the summoning circle. Well, the monsters we are summoning really require only one thing for them to come into our world, and that thing is the nectar of life. The nectar of life? The other two also looked confused. I'm talking about blood. That's why they sent the three of you here, for your blood to be used to summon another monster. It leaned its back against the wall. Go ahead, Ipos. And what exactly does that entail? What the hell is that? Charles turned, but it was too late. There was a large creature behind him. It had the body of a lion, but jutting out of the mane was the neck and head of a goose. It was reared upon its webbed goose hind legs, and its claws tore into Charles' neck and chest. Charles fell dead against the ground, the essence of his life. His blood gushed out, covering the circle that was drawn on the floor that he had fallen on. Julian turned to run, but was quickly pinned down by the creature's front paws, the weight of the creature crushing his lungs, not allowing him to breathe. He lay there under the beast, asphyxiating. Jake had fallen onto his back, screaming in terror. He was holding the goose's neck while the beak snapped at his face and neck, ripping skin where its beak could find a hold. The being in the form of Jonah snorted at the sight of this, not being able to hold back a laugh at how silly the man looked, getting bit into by that goose's beak. Jonah continued in his laughter. A goose killing a man? But it transpired as such. All of their blood congealed upon that summoning circle, giving form to a new monster. The thing laughed, because it knew soon more blood would spill. However, this time it would be on the streets, not in this dark basement. 2. Long was in an office, really just a tent, by the barriers they had placed around the city enclosing the quarantine. He flipped through the progress reports that investigators within the barrier were sending back. Nothing, nothing, nothing. He flipped to the last page. Nothing! Damn it! If we just had a clue where we could catch this guy. But he disappeared into the town, and for some reason none of the citizens want to talk. He threw the papers across the room. He was then brought to the alert by a shout from outside. Sir, there's something out here you need to see. Long collected his nerves and walked outside to see what the commotion was. The sun shining brilliantly overhead, it was another hot day. You see that in the distance, Captain? It looks like a dog. It looks like it's flying. Long had to agree with the assessment. Whatever it is that's coming this way, we'll hold the barrier. As they continued to approach, they saw that it was indeed a dog, and it was indeed flying, large furry wings carrying it along. It looked like some sort of fluffy terrier, its tongue lolled outside of its mouth. It panted in this heat. It barked a few times as it continued to fly in their direction, a medium-sized dog flying, seemingly floating on the air. "Sir, it's not stopping." The guard sounded increasingly nervous. He brought his automatic rifle to his shoulder. "That thing is looking at me," the guard thought. He began to break out in a cold sweat. What is that thing? His mind raced. Long saw the uneasiness setting in with some of the guards. I, I don't like this, Captain." The rifle was shaking. The man was shivering in his excitement. He was cracking, thought Long, under the stress and the surreal nature of the situation. The winged dog was getting close now. Long could swear that he could make out a smile on the dog's face. The dog gave two playful-sounding yaps, and then flew towards the barrier where the guards were standing. "No!" The guard pulled up his rifle, expelling bursts of fire towards the dog. But seemingly, out of thin air, the space between the guards and the dog appeared a crowd of people, the dog flying above them. There were groans and screams from the people that were marching in front. They were the ones who received the shots meant for that flying dog. They were invisible. The dog baited us. The crowd was invisible, hidden. Captain? The guard who had fired was stammering. There were a line of dead people in the crowd where he had fired. "You killed them!" the crowd screamed. Rage, fear, and confusion was thick in the air. This is it. This could be the beginning of the end of the lockdown. The end of us. The crowd was pushing against the barrier, shouting. If anyone had survived the initial gunfire, they had now had the life stamped out of them by the panicking crowd rushing the barrier. "Hold the line!" Long shouted over the din of the crowd, throwing a grenade of tear gas over the barrier. Too late, he thought to himself. They were clamoring over it. The sound of gunfire was non-stop in the background. Long tuned it out. The blood of the civilians was emptying onto the street. Long made his way around it, around the crowd. The mob had made it over the barrier. The guard who initially fired was screaming. He was being beaten to death by the crowd. That dog, it had shaped the human constitution in favor of murder. It inspired the will and motivation of men towards the actions they were committing. A grenade exploded. Long's ears were ringing. The barrier had fallen, and the crowd and the guards were one seething mass of conflict. Long was outside of the conflict, scanning the outside, seeing if he could place that face among the crowd. There, standing outside of the crowd, hands in his pocket, was a young man, short brown hair, thin black headband. If he could find a way to deal with him, maybe he could end the barrage of monsters, maybe he could salvage some order. Long started in his direction, minding the crowd. The young man was smiling when his dark eyes met Long's. He slowly removed a hand from his pocket and pointed at Long. Or was he pointing past him? Long did not have time to turn around before he was grabbed, pulled up from the ground. "What the hell is this?" Long was being dragged alongside a large black wolf, larger than any natural wolf could ever grow, running towards Jonah. The wolf had a rider. Though Long could not see him well while being dragged beside the wolf, Long craned his neck to get a better view of the rider holding him, the thing which had grabbed him. The rider was in the form of a man with the head of an owl, wings jutting from its back. In the hand that wasn't tightly grasping Long by the collar was a saber, proudly brandished. He dragged Long over beside Jonah, dropping him there onto his knees. The owl-headed rider held him by his shoulders from behind, holding him down in this position. Long had the full view of the chaos breaking out between the guards and the citizens in front of him. Jonah's hands were back in his pockets. He leaned his head down to speak into Long's ear. "Looks as if your little quarantine's falling apart, Chief. But don't you worry, I won't let the lockdown end." The monster in the shape of Jonah said mockingly, "I'll just take control over it myself, and all the lives trapped in here will serve as further sacrifices. I will use the essence of all their lives, condense it within myself, and become the physical manifestation of bile. Then I will win against him. Keeping the people within the quarantine fits my own goals just as well." Jonah looked for any reaction, any delightful dread that may have spread throughout Long's features. However, Long simply stared forward into the fervor in front of him, hands in his jacket pockets. "What's this now, Long? Do you have another surprise for me?" "Andros, check his pockets for me." The owl-headed rider, Andros, Long presumed, reached into Long's pocket and pulled out his radio broadcaster. "Have you been transmitting this?" Jonah smiled, taking the radio from Andros' hands. "Hello, testing, hello? Well, I hope you have enjoyed our last transmission. This has been Long, signing out." Jonah dropped the radio onto the ground with a nod towards Andros. Long let out a pained groan. He looked down at his chest and saw the blood-covered blade of the owl-headed rider's saber sticking out of his chest. Andros had impaled him. Andros pulled the blade back out of Long, who fell down face first onto the ground in front of him. 1. So we're going to your hometown, the same town where that book was stolen? Jason asked from the passenger seat of the car. That's right. Mages from the Esoteric Order told us that some people saw a dragon at that same cemetery I told you about. It can't be anything but a direct message to us. Whatever had taken Zhao's mind, whatever caused her to leave that day, has returned to the same place this whole thing started, Simon said, turning the car into a parking position beside an old shack across the road from the cemetery. We're here. Be ready for anything. Jason picked up the radio to call the others back at the quarantine. Don't bother, Jason. That radio only works within the lockdown. Long contacts headquarters himself via a transceiver placed outside of the quarantine's barrier. Let's finish this quickly so we can get back. They exited the car and walked up to the old shack that stood there. The weeds were not managed around the building and grew wildly, a sharp contrast to the well-maintained cemetery across the road. Simon pulled a key from his pocket and walked to the front door of the building. A few months after joining the organization under Long, I bought the place. It wasn't expensive, but of course the place means a lot to me. Simon unlocked the door. The door screeched as it opened. I should probably fix it up a little bit. He trailed off, ending the sentence with a shrug. The door opened up to the first floor that was not divided by rooms, and stairs that led to another second floor that was just one big area. There was an easel with a painting by the window looking outside. There were a couple of chairs in front of it. There was what must be a couple of paintings leaned against the wall, covered by a sheet to protect them from the dust that covered everything else in the room. Jason sneezed. Simon walked over to the wall and removed a board. There was a safe hidden inside. He unlocked it and pulled out the only thing within, which was a small controller with a button situated at the top, protected by shatter-resistant glass. Simon shook it a little in Jason's direction. Home field advantage. They both sat there in that old room across from the cemetery, a room that, for Simon at least, was as filled with memories as it was with dust. Jason just grabbed a seat and waited. He was still exhausted from everything else that had been happening as of late, and began to nod a little as he sat there. He knew he needed to stand at the ready, but he couldn't help but feel the exhaustion that had been building over the last few days, especially in the quiet seclusion of that room. I knew it. She's here. Jason began shaking himself awake. Stand at the ready. Get up, Jason. Stay focused. Jason told himself quietly as he looked out the window. There was a young woman, short black hair, dressed in a vest and long-sleeved button-up shirt. She was standing in the middle of the cemetery, open journal in hand. There was a blink of light from the sky from which Jason winced like a strike of lightning without an accompanying clap of thunder. Instead, hovering above the woman was a gigantic dragon, slender and writhing like a snake dancing through the sky. Simon was also focusing on his own sigil. Underneath the woman and throughout the graveyard around her, corpses were rising from the depths of the earth. They reached out to grab her, but she held onto the dragon's leg and was brought up into the air. We should probably get out of here, just in case. Jason scoffed at this flippancy, but hurried down the stairs and out of the building. Outside the building, Jason saw that the cemetery now was covered by several dozen corpses reanimated by Simon. He's controlling all of them, Jason thought, perplexed by the feat. What other strange powers did those of the Esoteric Order claim ability? The large dragon was writhing within the sky above them, its rider now on top of its head, holding on to two long horns that jutted out of its head. The dragon focused in on Simon and Jason and swooped down towards them. The horde of zombies moved to fill the space between the two opposing forces. The dragon merely opened its mouth, bit into the writhing mass of crowded corpses, and continued unperturbed. Simon pulled Jason to the left and threw him and himself behind his car. The dragon continued on, taking a sharp turn upwards before hitting the building in a great show of agility and flexibility. Its lithe, nimble, though greatly massive body reorienting itself in the air, some fetid corpses that were not gnashed by its jaws held onto the scales of its side. Stay down, Jason. He pulled that controller out of his pocket. The dragon began to swoop back in their direction before Simon pulled back the glass, securing the button that he swiftly pressed. There was a loud sound of many explosions going off at the same time. The dragon crashed into the ground, followed shortly after by a shower of body parts, the limbs, heads, torsos, and insides of the corpses that were just detonated. What the hell was that, Simon? Jason screamed, his ears ringing from the explosion. Home field advantage. I filled the bodies with explosives. Simon followed this by loudly laughing. That seemed excessive. Jason stood, ears ringing, legs shaking, a rotten hand falling off of his lap as he stood. Cleanup is the job of Long's organization, Simon said as if exonerating himself of any repercussions his actions may have had. Simon sobered up and ran towards the graveyard and stopped when he found Zhao lying among the tombstones. He checked for a pulse. Simon? Zhao was scraped up for being thrown from the dragon as it crashed into the ground, but seemed to be alright. Where am I? You were attacking us, riding a dragon. Are you alright? I'm confused. I feel like I've been in a dream for a while, not in control. Hell, not even in my own body, like I was taken over by a traveling consciousness. Sometimes I was in my own body, other times I was seeing through another's. Like I could get glimpses of what the different vessels could see, the different hostages of that traveling consciousness. Wait. Suddenly she jerked to attention but grabbed her side in pain as she tried to rise off the ground. There's a quarantine on right now, right? If anything I saw is real, then that city is under attack right now. Jason was looking at the large dragon lying dead on the ground. Next to it was the book. He ran over to them holding the Baize. He had overheard the conversation. Is Isabel alright in there? If what I saw is correct, the city is overrun, and some man named Long was executed by Jonah? I don't know where Isabel is. Zhao seemed to be struggling with what she was saying, both out of physical pain and due to the contents of her words. I'm going back. Jason dropped the Baize in Simon's hands. Kamazats! The towering monster that was Kamazats appeared before them. Hey, wait! Jason ignored Simon's demands and held on to Kamazats as he flew into the sky, traveling in the direction of the quarantined city. 0.